Greetings, fellow explorers, and welcome to the 11th episode of Geekoscopy101, the podcast that highlights the nexus between science, story, wonder, and philosophy with me, your host, Dr. General Ste, and today we are pondering the depths of history with General Ste. How are you doing, Ste?
How are you? How's things? Great to be on the show, and thank you for having me. I really do genuinely appreciate it, and for working with me to finally schedule the time, even though there's only about a 1 hour difference between our two countries. It seems to It seems to be easier to schedule a time with one of my mods who's from Canada than it is for us to find an overlap.
A 1 hour time difference. Yeah, it was. I mean, the worst for the show was some guys in the west coast of the US that did cosplay for science. So that was at like 1 a.m. we were recording. So yeah, this is still mild compared to that.
You still get to bed while it's still Thursday, by the end of it.
It's still possible to go to bed before midnight. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, General Ste, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are in this moment, and what you do?
Well, who I am in this moment is an Irishman in a bit of pain because of. I hope your viewers don't mind me in a tank top. I've only just gotten a tattoo, so it's a little bit fragile at the minute. And if I layer it over, it's going to be I'm going to be wincing as I talk to you. So yeah. Other than in this very moment, who I am, I'm an Irish 23-year-old from Dublin. I'm a Twitch streamer. I am a musician and historian and a load of other things that I'm not too sure I can mention on a stream. A lot of things that my friends call me. No, but I am... I suppose they're the three main ones. I'm a Twitch streamer to most of the people who'll be watching this, but a channel of the same name, General Ste. And I'm recently just in a master's program for Roman history and archaeology. I have graduated Trinity College in Dublin from ancient history and archaeology, a more kind of general approach, obviously less specialized, but have currently done a paper on with something we'll get into, I'm sure, as the interview goes on, and art history as well, specifically Renaissance art history is kind of my thing. So apart from that, as you can see, I mentioned musician because it's pretty obvious. The guitar is behind me and it's not something I can really dodge. But yeah, other than that, I'm just regular Irish guy, not really, like every Irish person, kind of,
I mean, how common are art historians in Ireland?
We actually have one of the nicer galleries, would you believe, in Dublin. We have a really fine collection of art in our National Gallery. Everything from, I suppose I was about to say Francis Bacon, but Francis Bacon is in another gallery just up the city called the Hugh Lane Gallery, where we actually have a recreation of his studio, which is very cool. It's literally... It was catalogued like piece by piece and put back together in the studio. But we've everything from Francis Bacon, I suppose, all the way to, oh my God, stained glass with Harry Clarke. And, meeting on the turret stairs. Everybody knows that. All the lovers in your show will know the famous painting of the knight going up the turret stairs and him grasping onto the girl as she goes down the turret stairs, and a great collection of Jack B. Yeats and famously William Butler Yeats's brother, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, who was an artist while William was a poet. And then we have the Caravaggio, the Taking of Christ. We have a great collection, of which there's so many wonderful stories about, that particularly that Taking of Christ one, which is a great story. We might get to it at some stage if you want to go down that route. But yeah, we have a wonderful collection of paintings. So to answer your question, how common are we? Uncommon, but the love is there. Irish people are known for our love and kind of creation of the arts, I suppose, between poetry and stories and trad songs, and we love our culture, and even though to an outside audience, the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Irish people, I suppose, is, oh, you go and drink and have a pint of Guinness or whatever. But there's an awful lot more to us than that when you just think about it, when you give it just a second of thought and you go, oh, James Joyce and Ulysses and, W.B. Yeats and his poetry. And, you go back, oh God, Seamus Heaney and his poetry. I mean, and then you've got artists and God, singers and musicians, just to digress into that. Like, I mean, obviously the biggest one is obviously U2 and Bono and everything, but I'm a blues musician myself, so I mean Rory Gallagher jumps to mind, and Thin Lizzy and everything like that. So I mean, I suppose, how common are we? Not very, but how ingrained in our society are we? Probably more than even we realize. Do you know? So I think that's quite interesting to acknowledge.
Before we leave the art discussion for a bit, what did you get a tattoo of? What is it?
Now this is a couple of different ones. Athena on my bicep, Pegasus on my inner bicep, and then I have the Nemean lion, which is just too sore to pull aside, but it's the Nemean lion, and then a quote, rise and rise again until lambs become lions, which is it was the lion that I got done today, but just finishing it off. But yeah, it's not very hard to tell where my interests lie. If you just look at my,
Who would guess? It's such a mystery.
Yeah, I'm not a nanoscientist. I'm really not.
It's all really Greek to me.
Greek history always was my Achilles armpit,
Achilles, that's a good one. So how did this love for history come about?
Oh my God. How long is your interview?
About an hour.
I know. I mean, the funny answer is the land before time. When I was a knee-high to a grasshopper. Don't know if you've ever heard that saying, but that's an Irish saying.
That's a new one for me.
Small, you're knee-high to a grasshopper. So yeah, I suppose there, I always had an interest in, like, what kids do, dinosaurs and, kind of, I suppose you grow up and you like lads kind of like, guns and stuff like that. So World War II was always a big pull for me, and it was definitely like the battles and stuff like that. And then as I got a little bit older, into kind of my 10, 11, 12 years old, early teens, I kind of found a footing, because I always loved books. So I started off with fiction, as most kids do. Do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of grow up from bedtime stories all the way up into kind of fiction, and then slowly but surely I kind of, one author who was a huge influence on me was Simon Scarrow, and his Eagle series. I've mentioned it a couple of times on stream. His Eagle series of books, which I can't recommend highly enough, which is following two Roman soldiers fictionally through kind of Claudius's invasion of Britain and stuff like that up. And he doesn't write about anywhere that he hasn't already been, and he says this in the little blurb, let's say, at the back of his books. Almost every one of them says so. Everywhere that he writes about, he has personally visited, and he places these two characters within, the wider Roman context. And I don't believe he's a historian, but I mean, he's a historical writer. So I mean, sometimes that requires even more so than just reading through endless amounts of literature. It can actually be, you need to understand it to create a world around it and then palette it to a wider audience. So I think that there's, it's definitely not to be snuffed at in any way, shape or form. And that was a huge impact on me, because kind of read the books and I was like, hey, this is really cool. I was like, I like these two characters. I like this world that he's describing and the detail in which he's describing it. And of course, what comes from that is you go to your local bookstore and you pick up a non-fiction book and you kind of find your way. You kind of, for lack of a better phrase, you kind of stumble your way through it. And what I found out very quickly was that I kind of, it's not very difficult to see, like, connect the dots between the parts of history that I really enjoy. I started off with like Greece and Rome. Okay, right. I like art history. Well, what part of art history do I like? I like the rebirth of Greece and Rome, which is the Renaissance. Do you know what I mean? I pit stop in the Crusades because I enjoy the kind of, as you'll see later on in the interview, my kind of speciality, quote unquote, is like cultural exchange. And I love the kind of both ideological and military, because I still like my whole, guns and warfare kind of vibe. I enjoy the whole ideological and military clash of the Crusades. So I kind of pit stop there for a little while, and then I kind of take a leap to the Renaissance. And then the next part of history that I really enjoy learning about is like Napoleonic history and kind of revolutionary Europe. So around that kind of 1780s to about 1820, that kind of vibe, that 40, 50 year period. I think that's fascinating. And then, of course, I'll always have that little place in my heart for, the kid who grew up reading, World War II battle stories and stuff like that. So, and who watched, Battle of the Bulge and A Bridge Too Far and all those movies that have, Henry Fonda and all these great actors in that kind of stimulated it. So that's kind of where it progressed from. I kind of took a leap from historical fiction into actual nonfiction, and then kind of connected the dots, like, I really liked Caesar, as every Roman historian is stereotypically a fan of. And then went from there and kind of like, Caesar's idolized by Napoleon, and who's in all these paintings during the Renaissance, but Caesar and Crassus and Pompey and everything. So I mean, as is obvious with the tattoos, as is obvious with everything nearly about me, is that I don't really stray too much from the path, but that's kind of the chronology of where it came from. It's probably a very predictable answer, but it is the truth,
And what is your focus of study for history?
My focus of study is Republican Rome. Rome. So specifically Rome from the end of the Third Samnite War to give or take Augustus. Could be a little bit before that. Sometimes I stop, depending on the specific, let's say, like context in which I'm studying. I could finish at Augustus. I rarely go past Augustus. Now, my interest goes past Augustus, but my study does not necessarily. But usually I kind of draw roughly to a close around the Gracchi. So about, couple half century before Caesar kind of vibe. That's where the decline and fall of the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire. I'm paraphrasing Edward Gibbon there. But I kind of stop. I start to slow down because it's so done. The bit that everybody talks about is the 200 years from the birth of Caesar to the death of Titus after the building of the Colosseum. Everybody slows down then, and it's like, you kind of got from 100 BC to about 100 AD, and I know, okay, 100 AD would be technically the death of Nerva, but you know what I mean. It's give or take. And when you cover those 200 years, it is like, no matter what way you slice up the cake, it's like, it is the 200 years that is the most written about, because it's the part of the 200 years that we have the most surviving from. We have the likes of Cicero and Catullus and Ovid and Virgil and all these people who were writing. And even in the 100 years previous, like, you have Polybius, but Polybius is our main source for what happens in the Punic Wars, and he's writing like shortly after kind of vibe. He's second century BC, so he's after the Second Punic War, but within livable memory, and like 90% of what we have comes from that. So therefore, 90% of the historical literature is going to be centered around that. And I came across it a hell of a lot. Like, it's just personal preference, really, at the end of the day. You write about what you enjoy. And the part, to put it in like a quotation mark in a way, the part that I love is, there was actually a book written with a very good title. And I was like, damn, I didn't think of that. It's like When Rome Spreads Her Wings. That's actually a book title about her territorial expansion between the Punic Wars. And that was a good way of kind of verbalizing exactly what I had an interest in. I had an interest in the part where Rome was making an empire, not when Rome already had it and they were going, do you remember the glory days? It was it was actually the glory days. They didn't even know it, Yeah. That's my vibe.
And where does the archaeology tie in? Does it tie in with that, or do you do it on a totally separate subject?
You can't have one without the other. In my field, okay, you can have historiography without archaeology.
Historiography, that's a new term for me.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Historiography is the the study and writing of history. So if you look at, let's say, Thucydides, do you know Thucydides? Yeah, so Thucydides writes about the Peloponnesian War. His is a historiographical account. Okay, now that's pulling it right back to an ancient example. It's because now he could have, but I mean, in a general sense, we take it that he hasn't used archaeological or really first-hand evidence, like primary source evidence. Now, he is a primary source. He fought in the Peloponnesian War, but he's writing about it from memory. He's writing about it from talking to people. Which is very primary source, but he's not dealing with, oh, I have a sword from such and such that says such and such. He's literally telling a narrative, and that's historiography. That's the like literally it's graph, like, which is to write. Do you know what I mean? And it's history. It's literally writing history. The distinction I make here is that archaeology can exist without historiography, and historiography can exist without archaeology, but studying history cannot exist without both. So you can write about an event and you can dig up Troy, but you can't write a history of Troy without both. You require first-hand evidence. You require people to get, literally down in the dirt to get primary evidence. Now, granted, it depends on the time period as well. Like, I mean, a primary source can also be, as I said, in other areas of interest of mine. It's not a qualification by any stretch, but I approach it with the same level of intensity. Let's say, I just haven't studied it. Is, as I said, Napoleonic warfare. You can have letters from Waterloo. They're a primary source, right? Because these soldiers wrote down. No one needs to dig them up. Okay, you can go into a library and quote unquote dig them up, but no one has to get into the ground and dig up a sword or a musket to know about what happened at Waterloo. That's fine. So you can still have a primary source there and then write about it from the narrative, in which case it is still historiography, and the archaeology is made kind of redundant by the proximity to the modern day and the variety of knowledge we have about the time. Ancient history is not the same thing. Ancient history, that approach doesn't work. Okay. We only have roughly somewhere in the region of, our best estimate is about 1% of surviving literature from the ancient world. And even that's given us a lot of credit for what we have found. Okay. It's far, far more likely that we are 0.5%, 0.25% of what was actually created. Now, so we don't have the luxury of, letters from soldiers of Waterloo. We have Cicero's letters, right? Okay, fine. And they had to be almost certainly dug up, or inscriptions and tablets have to be dug up. And they form the narrative of historiography. So therefore, the link between archaeology and historiography when it comes to modern history is a little bit more tenuous, because, as I said, you don't need an archaeologist to know about Waterloo. Granted, they're not going to do any harm if you do a dig, but really, you don't need it, right? Whereas you do need it when you want to get a full rounded picture of the ancient world. So the reason I go on this tangent is because you asked, are they like exclusive or are they symbiotic? They are totally symbiotic in my field, because I can't write a paper without considering the archaeology. The archaeology cannot produce anything more than an excavation report without historiography and the context. An archaeologist will go into a dig site. No archaeologist will go into a dig site not knowing what they're doing and just, start digging earth. They use the historical narrative of what we do have and what other people have written to make a logical explanation about where they're going to dig and why they're going to dig it. And that's for funding as much as it is for understanding and justification and publication to the wider audience. So when an archaeologist goes in and digs, they're not doing it naked or blind. They're going in because, it's probably likely there's something here. Then they dig and they go, we didn't expect that. And then it just kind of passes the parcel back to a historian, or possibly the same archaeologist will do it, and will produce a narrative from it, or will add to the narrative. So in that sense, with my field, they're symbiotic, and they are impossible to exist. It is impossible for them to exist without each other. So to answer your question, where do I sit in that? I am both. I have a qualification in both. As a personal preference, because I enjoy writing, I am probably slightly more of a historian than an archaeologist in tendency. but in no way, shape, or form do I ignore the other one for historiography, or ignore historiography for archaeology. Sometimes it's just a case of what you end up studying, like what your speciality is. So if you went into studying the Acropolis in Athens as a particular area of study, right? The likelihood is that you're not going to have to dig there. You're not going to have to pull out the archaeologist within you to do a new study on the Athenian Acropolis, because it has been almost fully excavated. We know what's been there all the way down to the Bronze Age and Mycenaean times. So the likelihood is that you're not going to be involved in that, but you can still have a new approach to the study of it. Whereas if you turned around and said, I'm going to go and study Troy, Ilium, right? You're going to have to probably go there. You're probably going to have to do some sort of new excavation on it because of the disparity in time between the last excavation and this. And obviously an awful lot of it has to do as well with commercialism and like the frequency of visitor and everything. I mean, the Athenian Acropolis is like the Colosseum, one of the most visited places in the world. It's going to be the place that if you're American and you're coming to Europe, you're going to want to see it if you go to Greece. If you're an American or a Canadian or whatever, whoever you might be, I'm just using it as an example of outside Europe, and you decide to come to Turkey, you're probably not going to want to go and see Troy. It's probably not going to be as high up on your list. You're probably going to go and see Istanbul or something, you know? And with that in mind, it's like, with the lack of commercialism comes a lack of funding to the general area, which means a lack of, unfortunately, interest, and then a lack of funding to archaeologists to explore more. So it turns into a vicious cycle. So therefore, if you pick a place that's probably less commercial, you might have to incorporate the archaeologist part of your expertise in order to generate new historiography about it. Hope that makes sense.
It does, yeah. It seems like a very tight, like logistical decision as to what to study and balance between what's available and what's not. And
yeah, I mean, everybody goes in with a you know, the rose tinted glasses on them. I see it with my you know, ex students ex fellow students, and even now with people who I can now, I suppose, call, you know, soon to be colleagues, I suppose, in a way, that it's often not where you end up is often not where you thought you'd end up. But with the field that we're in, it's like, well, I kind of love it regardless, you know, because it's like I've stumbled across something, and sometimes the rock you stub your toe on can sometimes make you fall right where you need to. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you've ended up in the wrong place. I think if you hit the general area of where you're at, and if you're doing something you like, well, then I don't think anyone really minds. No, I haven't come across anybody that really minds where they kind of end up. I found that an awful lot with papers that I saw people around me write. I was like, were you not doing your dissertation or your whatever on there? Were you not doing that paper on this or something? They're like, yeah, then about halfway through, I stumbled across this and I realized, actually, I prefer that. And I'm like, well, if you didn't start where you started, you wouldn't have ended up at that piece of literature, and so on and so forth. And, you know, it's the machinations of fate, I suppose, you know?
Yeah. Talking about ending up in different places, let's do a bit of a 180.
Okay.
But not really. And talk about how you got into gaming and streaming.
So the land before time. How I get into gaming and streaming. It's actually it's not too far off the original story, would you believe? When I was kind of delving through those Simon Scarrow books, as I said, every kid growing up, you would have had like a PlayStation or a Nintendo or something. And everybody had the same games, you know, like Mario 64 DS and all those kind of things. And I remember very vividly going into GameStop one day after just finishing one of those Simon Scarrow books and seeing Age of Empires on PlayStation. I was like, ooh, that looks cool. I picked it up and I brought it home. And I wish a PlayStation could have been able to clock hours, because I'd say I would have put any of my Steam games right now to shame with the hours I spent playing that game. And then I got a laptop when I was, you know, in my early teens, and I was like, oh, cool, right. And I remember this. It's like watershed moments. I remember going into a bookstore in Dublin, and they had one of these twisty racks, like one of the ones that you could like spin. They usually have postcards on them or something.
Yeah.
And it had PC games. And one of the PC games was Rome Total War, the first one. And I was like, that looks cool. So I picked it up and I brought it home, and I couldn't wait to plug it in and play it. And it blew my mind. It was the greatest thing I'd ever played since Age of Empires. And then I just, you get a bit older, you get a job, you kind of earn a semblance of money, and you're like, what do you spend it on? Well, all you've got is a laptop and a football. So when you come out from playing football, you come in and you play the new game you bought, which is Medieval 2 or Rome 2. Okay, I'm jumping ahead a little bit there, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Total War. It was Total War that did it for me. It was the perfect mishmash of everything I wanted out of a game. Still is. I see it with other streamers, with content creators. I see people kind of have issues with the franchise, with this and that. I was never, and this goes for everything. Like, God, even with, I'm a huge fan of like Red Dead Redemption and everything like that. I never had big issues with like gaming companies, Rockstar, Creative Assembly, say whatever, EA. Okay, microtransactions, whatever. That's that's a whole other thing. But I never get passionate enough about gaming companies to be like, oh, I don't like the franchise anymore because I'm sick of this or sick of that. I just love Total War. I love the dynamic of it. I love the fact that you're a general. I love the fact that you can conquer where you like and you can do what you like, and at the same time, it means nothing, and it's a bit of fun. You can experiment with history, and you can. And I really think it's underrated sometimes, particularly the older games get an awful lot of credit for, they're great at this, and I've so many memories growing up, and they really introduced me to PC gaming, and look at all the things we could do. But you know what? A lot of research goes into them. I really see it. I see it now, particularly like Rome 2, because I know what I'm looking for, right? And there's a lot of details. There's a lot of things that go. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is another one. Assassin's Creed is another huge franchise on the Xbox. So I had a PC and then an Xbox, and I had Assassin's Creed on one and I had Total War on the other. And I just got my fix. I went into Brotherhood and I was running through Rome, skewering guards with a pole. And then I was coming onto the onto the PC and playing as Rome and conquering Britain and all this kind of thing. And I was like, this is brilliant. And I just got my fix. And there's so many details in those Assassin's Creed games. It's unbelievable. Like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I can get into again later when we talk about, maybe, I don't know if we want to talk more about what the channel covers or whatever, but like there's stuff in that would blow people's minds. I try to cover it on my stream sometimes about like buildings being half finished because it's in a certain year at a certain month of the year. They went to that level of detail that they know, or they knew what buildings and what state, minutiae of Athens and Corinth and Sparta actually looked like. And I'm like, whoa, no one would even see this unless you knew what you were looking for. Yeah. And that to me has just scratched the biggest itch as a gamer and everything. So as a result of that, then when it came to like this, honest to God, the thing was one of my friends and colleagues, and also my head moderator, Snag and Access, for those people who know on the channel, encouraged me. He was like, lad, you should, during lockdown, he was like, you should go on to Twitch and just watch something. I think he was trying to get me to buy a game. I think he was getting me to buy The Witcher or something, right? And he was like, go on and check it out on Twitch. And I was like, Twitch? I've heard of that. And he was like, yeah, go on and look at it. So I set up an account and I started watching it, and I was like, this is pretty cool. And so then, of course, I ended up looking at Total War, and I was like, oh, I see these guys doing this. And I'm like, I could do that. I could do that. And so I tried it. And here I am 4 months, the end of June, July, August, September. I beg your pardon, the beginning of June. So yeah, it's the beginning of October. So 4 months and 320 odd followers and however many subscribers left. And every night I come home 3-4 nights a week, it's the thing that I've gone on stream and I've been in such bad moods. I was like, no, I have to do this. I've gone on stream and boom, the community just brightened my day. and I will forever be indebted to them for that. As long as I can provide entertaining content, then bam, I've hit a damn good thing, because it just merges everything I've just talked about. I can talk about history to them.
Yeah.
I can play games that scratch my historical and old, like young me gamer itch, and I can talk to people. And as if your viewers haven't noticed already, because of my huge monologue of talking at the minute, I do enjoy talking. I'm Irish. I haven't even had a drink, and I enjoy talking. You should see me on a drink.
No, it's good. It's always good to have stuff to talk about and form a community around the stuff that you like. And it's just that you found a very good niche to exist in and that you're happy about. So that's always, I feel, a good thing. It's part of the ballpark that you found yourself in with all the stuff that you do.
I've also been tremendously lucky, though. I've had one or two people in the community say to me, like, "Oh, you're doing so good, like you're shooting up in followers." And to be honest with you, I care about them and followers, not individuals. I mean the number, right?
Yeah.
I care about them and I don't, because it's not the be all and end all. I've gone through phases where I'm like, oh, I'd love to hit 500 followers by Christmas. I would love that. Okay. That's just a little personal goal of mine, because then it's like 6 months and I'm like, cool, that would just be amazing, but at the end of the day, I'm like, do you know what though? I don't really care, because every stream I come on, there's 20 plus viewers, and of those 20 plus viewers, sometimes 30, 40 viewers, depending on the day, depending on the raid, depending on the game, depending on just how lucky you get, right? But no matter what, there's 12 or 15 people always talking. And I would give up the follower count to have 12 or 15 active people in a chat all at once. And I barely know, I think I've seen the faces of maybe 3 or 4 of them that are always there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm so proud to call them friends and like a part of a community with them. I'm so proud to be part of a community with them, because people like, let's say yourself, if you didn't know the channel at all and you just came in because you happened to pick on my stream because I was top of the Total War Rome 2 channel on Twitch. You came in, you went, "Hey, Ste, I can guarantee you a penny to a pound that at least 7 or 8 of those people will reply, 'Hey, Geek, what's up, Geek? Hey, welcome, pal. Oh, good to have you here. How are you?'" And I just watch it sometimes. Sometimes I'll go, "Oh, hey, Geek, what's up? Have you been in the stream long?" That's all I'll say. And I will watch as you would reply to me once and say like, "Oh, hey, Ste, yeah, this looks cool." And then your next 10, 15 messages will be in reply and full conversation with the people in my community who have no reason to talk to you. They're there for their own enjoyment, but they decide, no, we're going to welcome this person. And that is the one thing that comes back consistently. And I have no power over it whatsoever. Consistently comes back to me after streams, during streams, on Twitter, on Discord, that the community is so welcoming. And that is something that I can't control, but it is something that I will forever be grateful for. And that I am so lucky for that. And that's why I say that I'm lucky, because it could have so easily gone another way. So I've hit a gold mine of people, and I don't think I'll ever truly understand I don't think they'll ever truly understand how appreciative I am of it. But I certainly don't think I'll ever understand how I got so lucky.
Yeah. Sometimes lightning strikes, but also I think you're fairly good at what you do, though. So it's a toss up between the interest and the building of a community, and just enjoying the enentertainment that you provide. So I wouldn't say it's totally luck, because I mean, like, you sometimes, like, if you join a raid and you go to another person's channel, like, you don't, like, it's not 100% that every person in that raid is going to enjoy that next person's stream, either because they don't like the game, or they just don't understand, like, don't jive with the person. So it's actually like a lot of skills you have to use in Twitch to try and keep the audience engaged. So I wouldn't say it's totally luck, but I always like to I'm gonna give credit where credit is due. It's difficult to be a Twitch streamer. Like I Like if anybody says that, it's something that's easy and you can get famous overnight, like that's not what really happens. Like
it's also my opinion that if you're in it to get famous, you're in it for the wrong reason. I've said this 1,000,001 times on stream. I actually had a conversation with somebody off stream about this, a friend of mine who is a regular in the stream. And I was like, oh, what if start losing followers? Now I know this is on the back of the statement I just made. I was like, what if people start like just stop showing up or something? And apart from her saying, well, you can't control that, which is true regardless, right? You can't control it. But she said something which meant an awful lot, and it's just kind of on the back of what you said, but it just substantiates it, because I suppose in a general sense, I think the Twitch streamers that go in just doing what they want to do and doing it in a friendly, welcoming way are the streamers who worry about this kind of thing. And then the streamers who go in to try and just clock dollar bills and views and whatever, kind of they don't really see what's right in front of them, which is that the reason this is what she said, the reason 95% of people follow me, she mentioned me, but you, I say you in a plural sense as well. The reason 95% of people follow you is that they like you and your company. And it doesn't matter what games you're playing. Yes, it's good if it's consistent. It's good if you have a vibe on the channel. And it's good if your games match your vibe. So like, I play historically themed games. I use that very lightly. Okay, Planet Zoo is not a historically themed game, but I adore it and I get to chill out with it. And at the start of a Planet Zoo stream, I will always say to people, we're going to chill tonight. Assassin's Creed, Red Dead Redemption, Total War. God knows, tomorrow I'm on stream and I'm playing Star Wars Battlefront 2. Is that historically themed? No. But do I love the game and do people get great crack because I play it with a friend and we have a laugh? And if I was saving it just for consistency of content and consistency of theme, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be doing that on stream. But what she said is very true, which is people will follow you from game to game within as long as you enjoy playing it, it's in a relative bracket. But she said they will follow you from game to game because they get enjoyment watching you and what you create. And that's something that really stuck with me. And I think it's important that gets through to Twitch streamers. I think it's a compliment when it's realized is that you are the hook. It's not the game. You are what's important.
For sure,
And if you hook the person and if the person gets hooked with you, you can carry them around games and be like, hey, we're going to do this tonight and this is going to be the vibe, but I'm still here and enjoy it with me. That's the most powerful statement on Twitch.
For sure. And I agree with you. I don't know how well that I do in that sense. I still feel like I got a long ways to go.
No, man, you're doing a great job.
Work.
You're doing such a great job. I have so much time for you as a streamer and as a person. And for this kind of thing that you do as well. Like I couldn't do this. This is not my vibe. Do you know? I couldn't do what you do here.
Really, you don't think you would be able to conduct interviews like with other historians or art history people or archaeologists?
Maybe I could give it a go, but I'm not yet. It's not.
Yeah, maybe you just need some coaxing sometime.
I love talking to people. I love people. That was the one thing about, I'm sure it affected everybody in such a way, but for me personally, the thing that affected me most about lockdown was not loss of the gym or whatever. It was the loss of just talking in daily routine, and that was a huge hit for me personally. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. So could I conduct an interview? I probably could. Do I want to right now? No, not really. I love the fact that you asked me onto this, and I love talking to people on stream. I think I'm happy enough with the kind of like the vibe I've got going at the minute. But I do really appreciate the vote of confidence.
It's understandable. I'm sure you could do it, but yeah, if you'd rather do other things, you'd rather do other things. You don't have to do everything.
All I'm saying, that was a compliment to you. Nice attempt at dodging there, but that was a compliment to you for what you do, because I couldn't do it at the minute, nor would I want to. So I tip my hat to you, sir.
Well, I'll take that compliment. You have to get everything you get, especially in 2020. You have to take your small victories.
Absolutely.
But on that note, like, how did 2020 and lockdown affect your work? Did it affect it in any way?
It did. It very much did. It affected. It affected the submission of a paper that was due, a final paper for me. Ended up being online. I have since gotten a hard copy printed for myself, because why the hell not? But yeah, it affected it, and it affected. It affected my. Okay, we mentioned the gallery earlier on. I did not realize how often I graced the gallery's hallowed halls until I couldn't. I used to go once, maybe twice a week. And I know you'd say, well, Steve, they're the same paintings. Yeah, but they are, but they're not when you look at them. You go in, you look at a painting, or you go into the library and you take out a book or whatever, and whatever it might be. It wasn't like as if I just walked down the street and picked up a pickaxe and started doing archaeology. So I mean, I had to do what I had to, work with what I got. But that was one thing that I really, my experience of what I love changed. I couldn't go to the gallery to just be surrounded by things that gave me peace of mind. Couldn't go to the library and just find the book that I know is in the library that has the answer to this question that I lost an hour of sleep on last night because I couldn't get the book on the online database, right? I couldn't do that. So I was trying to download the book. I was trying to find somebody who had the book, do you know what I mean? Or find an article that referenced that page of the book, or pay for Google Books. And it was infuriating. And I was like, and I have a whole big Google Drive doc with all the paintings that I love and all the architecture that I love. It's something I started from my first year in college. And every time I see a new building or a new piece of art, I search it on Google and I screenshot it and I throw it into that folder later. So I probably have about 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pieces of art and architecture in this folder. And I was looking at them and I was like, this isn't the same. These are my pictures and they aren't the same, because I'm looking at a PC screen and I feel like I can't get to them. Even though I can't get to the Mona Lisa when I'm in Dublin and it's not in lockdown, don't get me wrong, but I could go over to the gallery and I could feel like as if I'm closer to it there than I am on my computer screen at home, even though there's technically no difference. And so you ask, how did it affect my work? It affected one major paper as much as it affected anybody who had to start submit things online. But it really affected my interaction with the subject. And that took a long time to click back into. And the first thing I did when we got out of lockdown was go to the gallery.
So it was a kind of like a break in ritual that took you out of the headspace you needed to be in.
It was a break in ritual for both my studies, like the thing I had to do, but it was also a serious loss in what I just enjoyed doing. So, I mean, it did take me out of an academic headspace. Fair enough. I think I recovered that quicker because I had to. But it definitely took me longer to because I used to just be sitting down there, watching Tiger King, eating a bowl of cereal at 9:30 at night, just total backwards schedule. And I'd be like, God damn, I wish I could see that painting in the National Gallery right now. There's one by Titian, Ecce Homo, which is Christ, and it's a very specific painting. I think he did like 3 or 4 of them with the same title. And it's one in particular where Christ's head is like bowed, and it was just one that I can't even explain it. It's like an urge. I just wanted to see it. I just needed to stand in front of it. It's the first painting I went to when I walked into the gallery. I was like, I need to scratch this itch. I don't even know why. I just made a beeline for it. Then I went back to the start of the gallery and started again. But I just had to see it. It was honestly like a craving. And I get that an awful lot. Like I remember when I digress for a sec, but you'll get the overall theme here. When I went to Paris 2 Christmases ago, It was my second time in Paris now in general, but I had gone to the Louvre and I really wanted to see Napoleon crossing the Alps, in the Saint Bernard Pass, the one where he's reeling up on the horse by David, and the room was closed. And I was like, no. I went outside to the desk and I asked the lady at the souvenir desk, I was like, please tell me it's just moved to another room. She turned around. I speak Spanish and I'm teaching myself Italian, so I can't even understand what she said. But she turned around to one of her colleagues who looked like a senior and was like, said something beautifully eloquent in French, and turned back around to me and in a delightful French accent with a smile on her face said, I can help you. And I was like, what? She was like, did you know David did two? And I was like, no, I didn't actually. And she goes, yeah, one was for public view in the Louvre and one was for private view. And the other is in Versailles now on display. So like that, I made a beeline for Versailles on a bus, paid in, queued for an hour in the freezing cold in January, paid in, ran through it, could not find. All the rooms are done because obviously they have it like 1800, 1801, 1802. They actually have a stream of rooms, 15 rooms long. And I went up to, he crossed the Alps, in 1801. So I went 1802. I wasn't there. I said, okay, maybe it's 1805. Went there. I went all the way down to 1850. I couldn't find it. I was like, no, I was in a frenzy. And then I came around and I just shot out the last door, turned left. And as I turned, there it was at the end of the room. And I just kind of stood there like a 3-year-old looking at a Christmas tree. I was just like that. And that craving to just see something that you relate so much to. The only other time I've ever experienced that was at the end of lockdown this year, when I just needed to see this particular painting for whatever reason. I just needed to know that I was in the presence of something that gave me fuel to live, to put it dramatically. But it was.
That might be a bit too dramatic. But it's like this is something that I don't really understand that well. It's not. I just I don't get it. I don't know. Maybe you can help me. Because I don't derive any pleasure from seeing visual art.
Okay.
So I don't know whether it's because you have also historical context and stuff that add to it. So could you explain what emotions you're going through when you see a piece of art? Is it even possible to convey to another person who doesn't get it?
A short answer is no, but I'm going to give it a go because I think that that's the wrong answer. But I think anybody who doesn't want to try will just say no. Okay, what do you like? Do you like cooking? Do you like sports?
I like music. I like video games.
Music is music. Yeah. Let's stop at music there because I can relate to that one. Okay, so what kind of music do you like?
Right now,
blues or jazz?
Right now, it's. I like a lot of. I listen to video game soundtracks on repeat, like the Witcher soundtrack. The one that I've been listening to on repeat is Ghost of Tsushima soundtrack.
Oh, great soundtrack! Fantastic,
it's so
magnificent,
so good. So if I find a soundtrack that I can listen to on repeat, I usually do that. Like a lot of the Final Fantasies soundtracks I'm able to listen to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my vibe sometimes. Otherwise, it's alternate rock music.
Okay, so the reason I bring up music is because music has it would have been more difficult if you said food. So I'm glad you didn't say food, because music at least I can answer really honestly. Are you a musician, or do you just like music?
No, I just listen to music.
I say just as though it's the lesser of two. It is certainly not. It is far from it. Yeah. You can't be a musician if you don't like music, and you can't like music without appreciating musicians. So I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship once again. Okay, so what I'd say is that when you find a song that you like, right, and I'd say just like, not love or adore or listen to 24 hours a day, a song that you like, okay. The commercial aspect of it will say that the thing that gets you into the song is a hook. Okay. And that when you find the hook, and the hook can be deliberately implanted into a song, it can be something like, FRIENDS. That's it's that kind of vibe. Or it can be the hook that catches you personally, right? So I have been trying to establish what I like, because the way Spotify do this thing where you can like go to a song radio, where you can find a song you like and you right click on it, goes song radio, and it brings up songs that have a similar something to them, be it mood or key or whatever it might be. And I've done this as an experiment myself a couple of times to see. I've picked a song that I adore and I have on repeat 24 hours a day or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I love this song. And then I go into song radio and none of the songs do it for me. And I'm like, yeah, I get why they're the same, but it's not the same. It's not that,
I've had the same feeling,
Yeah, but they're the same thing. Apparently, they're the same thing. They would be on an album together of the same thing, right?
According to some algorithm, they're the same thing, but it doesn't feel the same. Yeah.
No, it doesn't feel the same. So then you turn around and you go, right, okay, well, let's listen to this song. Let's find out why I like it, why you like the Witcher soundtrack or something. You go, okay, well, what is it that this bubbles inside me? Does it make me feel calm? Does it make me want to get up and charge into a bunch of drowners? Does it make me want to, get up and dance or whatever it might be? I love the soundtrack to Red Dead Redemption. I think like Willie Nelson and stuff like that on that is absolutely fantastic. And, Cruel World and all that kind of thing. I think it's so perfectly placed in the game. So I get you with regards to game soundtracks. They can be as vibrant as emotive as movie soundtracks and about classical music and everything. It all comes from the same idea. What I'd say is that when you find a song and you kind of get into it and you're like, okay, well, the reason that I like this is because I relate to it for X reason. I like Cruel World because it reminded me of a part time in my life, or I liked the Witcher soundtrack because it reminds me of growing up playing the game. And it isn't actually The Witcher that I think of. It's Christmas that year with my family when I got the PlayStation and The Witcher. I'm just throwing out an example here, right? Now, there mightn't always be that deep of a reason. It might just be a cool beat drop or something. But by being able to pinpoint what it is in music that you're like, ooh, bam, that's it, right? Art is the exact same. Okay, I could stand beside 10 pictures called Ecce Homo. Feel nothing. Feel absolutely nothing. I can appreciate them. And you asked about context. I can probably tell you about the artist. I can tell you about the technique he used. I can tell you about the angle. I could probably stand in front of any one of the paintings and talk for 15 minutes about the painting and not even know the name, right? That's a skill that we actually have to learn when you study art, is show yourself pick a picture or get somebody else to pick a picture you've never seen before from a time period in art that you don't like and talk about it for 15 minutes. You don't know the year it was made or whatever. You have to garner it from your own knowledge, right? And I can tell you that I could stand in front of 10 pictures called Ecce Homo with Christ and it wouldn't garner a single part of me. But the reason that does is because that reminds me of home. That reminds me of something. The reason the Napoleon picture garners something within me is because it represents, because in the picture at the very bottom, he has written Napoleon and below it has written Hannibal crossing the Alps in a different font. And it reminds me of why I found the painting. I found the painting because Hannibal crossed the Alps and the next person that came up on that Google search was Napoleon. And that painting came up and it'll always remind me of that next step. And if you find a picture that you really love, or you find a piece of architecture or something that garners something within you that's like, ooh, this means something to me and I don't really know why. I find that the easiest way to do it is to figure out, well, where was the first time you saw it? What's the first emotion that comes to your mind when you think about it? And then what's the first memory that you associate with it? And if you can answer any of those three questions, you get closer to why you like it. So when you turn around and say, I don't really understand how you can have that emotive response to art, the blunt answer would be is that perhaps you didn't have a either conscious or unconscious correlation to the painting when you saw it. You were looking at it hoping to feel something. That's not how it works. Do you know what I mean? You don't listen to, I didn't listen to the Red Dead Redemption soundtrack before I finished the game and Arthur meant something to me in the story. Do you know, I never would have gone into it expecting to feel something. It just would have been another Willie Nelson song, right? But I would say forcing it is the worst is the worst way to try and gain something from it. Stumble upon something naturally, associate it with something you already like, and I guarantee you it'll be your doorstep into something wider. So if you really like The Witcher, well then find artwork from The Witcher. Do you know? A visual media is not just what's painted in the 15th century. Do you know? And the more you associate with something that you already hold dear, the easier it will be to expand on that. So that's my answer, is don't force it, and it will come. And for those reasons, for the same with music.
Yeah. I think it kind of makes sense. And now that you have expanded on that a bit, I think when it comes to visual art, like, what I think I like is maps. Like, I like looking at different types of maps from different eras. I actually have the Witcher map like right above you on my wall there. Something maybe I should explore further, because it's one of the things of kind of open world video games that comes standard, and you do have emotional attachments to certain locations on a video game map.
You do, absolutely.
So I suppose maybe I do like art, but just in map form and not in portraits or anything.
Have you ever seen some of the hand-drawn maps from the 15th, 16th century?
I've seen some, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at them, it's like saying I love writing, but I don't like the Gospels, which is fine. You don't need to be religious, but my God, look at some of the monastic designs around writing Gospels when they were handwritten, and the images they put with them and everything. Do you know what I mean? Expand on it, and and this is not just to you, but to your viewers as well. If you want to try and get into something new, from my experience, what has worked with me was find your in from what you already know. So if you really like maps, that's fantastic. That's visual art is just something visual that's pleasing. That's all it means. And that can be anything. My God, like, and if you just find you're in and you're like, oh, I can just imagine a train of thought here. This is probably not how it's ever going to go, but I imagine you going, oh, Ste mentioned something about, maps. Oh, well, I'm going to check out this guy. Oh, he's a cartographer, somebody who draws maps. I'm sure you knew that, but somebody who draws maps, right? And when I search him in the related searches is this guy, and this guy's far newer. Oh my God, look at his maps. And then you're like, okay, well, what else? What other art does he do? Oh, he does art like this. That's in the same style as the way he did that map I like, and so on and so forth, domino effect. And then you end up with something, you end up down a rabbit. It's like falling down a YouTube rabbit hole. You end up somewhere totally different, and you're like, whoa, how did I get here? You backspace on the tab, and you're like, shit, that's where I started.
Speaking about YouTube rabbit holes, I've been on 2 YouTube rabbit holes recently. One of them is essentially whether our timeline of human civilization is accurate, and whether it's been kind of one journey of building, or whether we have previously built up civilization and then it got taken away for some reason and then we started again. So the main kind of evidence for that, I don't know whether you call it evidence or more of a hypothesis, is one, the pyramids and the Sphinx might be older, but the Sphinx specifically might be older than we thought it was. And they are monolithic creations in a place in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe. Yes. So, what do you think about that? Yeah,
I've read this too, and I know there are a few scholars who historical enthusiasts who are who favor this idea. The next word I'm going to use will be the word from which they have the most issue if they were on this podcast, which is conventional archaeology, which is their whole sticking point. Conventional archaeology and conventional history, of which it has its flaws, as with everything, would argue to the contrary. Now, I'm no expert. I'm not an Egyptologist. I specialize in Roman history. What I would say is that there's a positive and a negative here. the first thing is that this is essential, this kind of discourse. And anybody who is hostile when having this kind of discourse should not be in the conversation. Okay. You can disagree with somebody's view without disagreeing with the person. Do you know what I mean? And I think that once, and this goes on both sides of the playing field here. Once you disagree, sometimes it can come very much like, oh, well, you're just part of the establishment, or the other way around, you're just anti-establishment. And it's like, as soon as you start throwing around a label like that, well, it doesn't matter what the person said. You've already pinned your color to the mast. So why even bother continuing the conversation on any further? It's never going to go any further. And it's just going to be a vicious cycle of disaster. If I've understood you correctly, your question is, do I put any stock in it, or what do I think of it?
What are your thoughts about that specific conversation that I think is coming up more and more in the past few years?
I think that there is explanations that need to be uncovered. I think it needs to be studied. I think presumptions can't be made on either side about either side's argument. I think the conventional archaeological approach and the conventional historiographical approach needs to be willing to change its approach and change its conclusions if they so require to be changed. But I also think that the opposite side that suggests an awful lot of this needs to be equally as willing to just admit, if it comes to it, or if it came to it, or if it has been said with particular piece of evidence, that, all right, well, that is an explanation. Okay. Yeah. Cool. What about the next question? I think by just being able to go, it's not an admittance of being wrong. It's an admittance of, oh, that's a more plausible understanding of it. That's not saying, oh, wow, everything I've said in the last hour or 2 hours or 5 hours is completely wrong and my life is on the line because I will be ashamed and won't have a place in a university and all. Once you play with those kind of high stakes games, you're like, well, what's the point in having the conversation if you're just afraid to lose everything? Do you know, we're not playing high stakes poker here. We're trying to find out everything for the benefit of everybody. Do you know? And I think that once you start throwing high stakes into it and been like, if I'm wrong in this, I lose my career kind of job, I think then you've lost. Then there's no point in having the argument at all, because then you're biased from the start because of other reasons. So that would be my opinion on the discourse. It also goes broader than the whole. That would be my opinion on discourse over a multitude of things. But it definitely is my opinion on discourse on, like, let's say the whole Göbekli Tepe and origins of the pyramids and stuff like that. As I said, I'm not an expert on the intricacies of it. It's certainly out of my remit of time range and area of study. But what I can say is that as a member of the historical community, as we all are, we have to remember this. I might be able to talk for 15 minutes in front of a painting, or I might be able to tell you, a whole life story of Catullus or Catiline or whatever, right? But like, my opinion on this stuff is just as important as anybody else who's never heard of it before. And definitely, and this is the most important thing, the facts at the end of the day affect me just as much as they affect you. So if we don't work together to get to the facts of something, nobody wins. Nobody wins. You just keep your paycheck.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I think one of the sticking points is probably like the funding and where the funding should go, because there's obviously like a limited amount of funding. So if you decide now to essentially change a paradigm, funding needs to go into trying to find more evidence and information for that. So funding is tied to careers and stuff like that. So I think that's probably one of the main sticking points. Like you said, like it's tied to your life and your reputation.
Yeah, I would agree. And the one thing that I would say about that is that the one part of archaeology that has not been explored enough, and this is regardless of any debate that you may have mentioned there or whatever. I know it has come up in that debate as well about rising sea levels and stuff. Underwater archaeology is something that no matter what like, listen, let's just jump forward. Let's go miles ahead of like Göbekli Tepe or whatever, and talk about just underwater archaeology in the Roman period, right? That is so useful to understanding trade routes, supply lines, army movements, population movements. Everybody thinks that the majority of the grain supply for Rome came from Egypt. It came from North Africa, you know, and we know that by shipwrecks. We know the trade routes. We know the sea routes, you know, by shipwrecks. The Uluburun shipwreck has been phenomenal for the study of Mycenaean and Minoan time periods in Greek history. Do you know what I mean? It's just laden with phenomenally preserved artifacts that are being shipped. It's just one of hundreds of thousands of ships that would have sailed the exact same route, and we just happen to have this one. So I think that, and this kind of answers the question in a roundabout way, because I'm conscious of staying away from a period that I don't really know much about, but the methodology still applies.
Yeah.
There is not enough funding for underwater archaeology, but neither is there an emphasis on archaeologists to specialize there. So it's a vicious cycle. Nobody specializes, so nobody puts forward the idea, so no funding goes there. So it'll always be an empty question mark in our research. Well, if we did more study here, we might know more. But anyway, let's go and do a dig on an island somewhere here and ignore that it's an island in the middle of the sea. Now, there has been moves in the archaeological community to try and change that. There has been. It's always a financial issue, but I mean, what's new in the world in that sense? Do you know what I mean? It's never
Especially
not a financial issue.
Yeah.
But I think that, yes, it feeds into the argument, because I know it's been brought up before about this whole Göbekli Tepe. I call it the Göbekli Tepe argument for the sake of the podcast, to kind of umbrella term it. The precursor civilization kind of vibe is that, oh, well, the sea levels have changed, and that this and that, and the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas and all these things. And yes, your point, like the underlying point that we need to do more, is correct regardless of the time period. It's not unique to the Göbekli Tepe time period. It's not unique to, you know, Mycenaean Greece. It is certainly not unique to the Roman time period. And I mean, once you turn around and say that, because that's something that we can all agree on, you know, if somebody who argues for a precursor civilization, somebody who argues against it, can both sit down and shake hands on the fact that, hey, maybe we need to put more money into underwater archaeology. Like, what? There's nothing to disagree on there, you know. And anybody who says that there is something under there that will support my argument is pure speculation. There's you don't know, because you haven't done the research yourself. And if you're advocating for more funding for somebody to go and do it, well, then work together to achieve that, and then let's get an answer, if you think that's where the answer lies, you know. So I mean, fighting's maybe a strong word. Disagreeing to the point that you think it's you know, tantamount to losing your career. I think it's it's big poker chips to be playing with, when you're like, listen, we all actually agree here that all we need to do is just try and find out more. So let's all just work together to create a community and create a financial cushion in which we both get our ways. And then when the research is done, let's sit down and go, right, okay, what do we know? Do you know? And that's my opinion on the whole thing. And that supersedes just the Younger Dryas Göbekli Tepe argument. You know?
Yeah, with any type of scientific or academic inquiry, like, we need more information in order to make an informed opinion about anything.
Absolutely.
And that's why this topic is so interesting, because this little information, because this idea was proposed so recently, and, you know, evidence is starting to come in, and the evidence is saying interesting things. It's just one of those things where you're like, you know, it's like one of those like reality shows on Netflix where, like, it's following a person's life, and you get one season in 1 year, and you have to like wait to actually see, like, what is reality going to happen next year.
Yeah,
it's kind of like that with this, and also the other one I didn't mention was Aliens. And whether aliens are around, have been around, and
this is the thing, and I will say only one statement about this, because whatever about history, like astrology and everything that goes with it is not my, or astronomy I should say, is not in my remit whatsoever. But one thing I will say is that I think that whole conversation has been plagued by Hollywood and the media's definition of what alien life is. And if you just go by the NASA and Oxford definition of what alien life is extraterrestrial organisms. And you go, oh, well, alien life found on Venus. And you're like, well, yeah, it's probably like a single cell organism. I mean, it's still true, but that doesn't mean that Paul has. Have you ever seen Paul, the movie Paul?
I think,
about the alien.
It
doesn't mean that Paul has just shown up. No, I am not I think it's. Yeah. I think that this is something that comes across as well with other areas, is that like I think you need to get your definition straight as well before you even enter a conversation. And I see it in debates in college. I see it in debates in schools, even at high school level, where people turn around and I really appreciate when it's done and they go, right, well, let's define what we're all talking about and let's make sure we agree on what each term means so that we can be careful not to deviate from our meaning, because we can always recite back to, oh, well, we identified this as this, so elaborate, you know what I mean? And that's very, very important. And can I just go back and just say, and this covers like the whole, let's say the last recent like half an hour of this conversation. I'd like to say that as a member of the historic community, and hopefully somebody who will in time give like more to it in terms of papers and output and everything. And I hope to be based on what I really enjoy studying. And as I said, I might trip over a rock and faceplant into something else I love, but I want to contribute in the area that I think I'm going to be contributing in. I just like to say that I personally stand by anybody asking questions. The whole Göbekli Tepe thing. I love to see it. I think it's healthy. I think it's the only way we've gotten here with an awful lot is to just go, well, are we sure? Do you know? And that's essential. That's so important. And as soon as that is gone, as soon as people are scared to ask why not, because of losing a paycheck or because of losing whatever, you know, like clout or whatever it might be, as soon as that's what's at stake for asking why, we need to revamp something. Now, I'm not saying it's there. I'm just saying that I think that, as you said, that's a recent suggestion. And because it's such a recent suggestion, I think it isn't there as prominently that, you know, it's a high stakes poker game. But I think that is very healthy. I think that should be talked about. I think it should be talked about openly, civilly. I think it should be based on evidence. I think it should be encouraged. I think that further investigation should be encouraged, and I think that it should form I think a platform should be had which people can ask why. But I think that platform needs to be inhabited by people who are, I'm not saying it isn't, I'm just saying that it should be inhabited by people who are willing to go, oh yeah, okay, cool. That wasn't what I thought it was, but cool. Grand. Next question. Do you know what I mean? And that can be either side of the argument. And I think that should be there. And it is there in some cases. And it could be there more in others. And it's not there at all in some other aspects of society. And I think that needs to be just, you know, set out as much as a definition of extraterrestrial life. Do you know?
Yeah. I think to probably sum that up is like, okay, we need more understanding and maybe less ego with the work.
Yeah, I agree.
So you've mentioned, you know, a few video game titles, including, you know, Total War and Rome and Assassin's Creed. From those, the only ones that I really played are Assassin's Creed and Age of Empires and things like Ghost of Tsushima. Like, I want to know, because you mentioned, you know, like, we were talking about Göbekli Tepe, like precursor you know, race and stuff like that. Like, in your history about knowing about history, is there anything like you would have found really interesting if it happened different? Like, what's your favorite like alternate history like thought exercise?
My favorite one is if Caesar wasn't murdered.
Okay,
that is really, that one gets me, really does. Or if Napoleon had won Waterloo. Either of them, because both were so close to but I suppose that's history in a nutshell, isn't it? That like everything is just a hair's breadth away from being totally different. Because Caesar was only 2 days away from his planned invasion of Parthia. He was supposed to attack Parthia, which he would have done. He would have won. Let's be honest. He was pretty much undefeated. He was going to swing up by the Black Sea, swing around the back of what is now modern day Ukraine and the Crimea, and come down the back of Germania, wipe out Dacia and Germania, and end back up in Gaul. He would have done a whole sweep around kind of, into Afghanistan, Armenia, up into southern Russia, across into Ukraine, down back into Germany, and across into France. And that, to me, if he'd just been able to go, now he listen, with the amount of change in climate and disease and everything, probably would have died on campaign, or something would have gone wrong. But if you were to base on his past campaigns, not an awful lot did go wrong. Or if it did go wrong, he wrote his own history, so we don't know about it. Talk about biased propaganda, but sure, look. But I think that's a big one. It's like, well, what if he wasn't killed? And that one really entertains me as a historian. Because it would have been no Augustus. Because Caesar would have lived, he wouldn't have passed on to his adoptive son. You wouldn't have had Mark Antony fall out with Octavian. You wouldn't have had, like, where would Cleopatra have sat in that whole thing with her son being Caesarion? And like, Brutus still been alive, Cassius, Cicero wouldn't have died because Cicero wouldn't have been purged by the Second Triumvirate. What other writings would Cicero have produced? There would have been no first dynasty of the imperial family because Caesar would have lived another 20, 30 years. Where would Rome be? Would it have still turned into an empire? Would have had the facade of a dictatorship? Would Caesar have been a good dictator? Would he have been like Sulla or Cincinnatus, who like gave up the dictatorship? Or would he have been a kind of what we would class as, like, obviously kind of backwards projection of like a Neronian or a Caligula kind of emperor or dictator, corrupted by the office? We just don't know. And I think that it would have changed so much about Europe. It would have changed everything, absolutely everything. And equally so would Napoleon have won the Battle of Waterloo. If Grouchy had just not strayed 30,000 men so many miles west of the Prussian army, or east of the Prussian army, he would have made it to Waterloo in time to push through the Duke of Wellington on the ridge at Hougoumont. And if he had, Duke of Wellington the British would have cracked before the Prussians properly made it onto the field, and Napoleon could have swung his army around and fought them at Papelotte, and they, as a result, the combined French army would have outnumbered the Prussian army. But the French army without Grouchy fighting what was left of the British army and the entire Prussian reinforcements were outnumbered, and he had committed the old guard and everything. And that would have changed everything, because Napoleon came back from 100 days and then defeated the British and the Persians. The Seventh Coalition, it would have shattered everything. It would have shattered Europe in two. I think that would have been a huge, whatever about Caesar and the kind of domino effect of history, but that really would have changed modern history hugely. They're my two big what ifs.
There's many examples of that across history where one change on a certain day could have just changed everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any examples of either video games or any other media that you think does like history or a historical account in a very poor manner, or a manner that you would have done differently?
Oh, good question. A very poor manner or done differently? Ooh. I'm trying to rack my brain now of... I think it was absolutely criminal of Call of Duty World at War to not do D-Day in their first playthrough. It had to do them, like, they had to release a new Call of Duty World War II only 2 years ago and put D-Day in. I think that was very poor for a consumer basis. They did the Pacific and they did Russia, wasn't it? You played as a Russian fighting on the Eastern Front, and you played as an American on the Pacific Front, and they missed the entire D-Day landings, and then they did a whole separate game based around like from D-Day onwards. And I think from a consumer point of view, when particularly to a Western audience, when you do that and you like release a game called World at War, and it's about the Second World War, and you completely miss one of the most crucial days in human history, I think that was maybe kind of a bad decision on their part. Now it worked out for them financially because everyone ended up buying the second one. But I just think that kind of let me down a little bit. I finished that game and I was like, what? No. No.
Well, they were using history in that sense to drive sales of a different product, which is anti-consumer. So I get what you're saying, and that the use of history there is more for sales than to portray history.
The only other one that I can kind of think of is I personally, and this is big, all right, I personally disagree with how the Romans were portrayed in Assassin's Creed Origins. I don't think... Oh, I have another one. Assassin's Creed Odyssey has no phalanx formation. They're just free-for-all battles in Odyssey. Yeah. When you get into the battles, they're just a cluster... I don't know if I'm able to use the word, you know what I mean? They're just a mess. Yeah. And yes, that is probably what battles descended into, a bit of a mosh pit. But you cannot
at the start,
you cannot have a game based in ancient Greece during the Peloponnesian War and not have phalanx warfare. It's like, what? Sorry, that just like clicked in my head, and I was like, whoa, absolutely triggered historian over here. I don't agree with how the Romans were portrayed in Origins. They weren't dressed as Roman soldiers. They were dressed as auxiliaries, and that's not what they would have been. So it's minutiae, but it matters. You know, it matters.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's immersion. You know, I suppose for the 90% of gamers who don't kind of deal with that stuff on a daily basis, they might miss it. But on the other hand, like, you have to give Assassin's Creed credit for getting a lot of the details in, you know, because for everything.
Which is what I said at the start about their whole like getting it down to the year. And I think that's actually quite a shame, because something like, people have still watched 300. You know, people are still going to remember the scene where they're interlocked and they go 3, 2, 1 and they push and then stab and then pull the shield back down. You're not even able to equip a shield in Odyssey. As opposed to Origins, where you had your little, like, a wooden kind of rounded shield, like an archer shield. You don't even get to equip a bronze phalanx shield in Odyssey, because you're supposed to be more assassin-y, which I get. But when you remove the shield, you remove the phalanx. When you remove the phalanx, you remove one of the most commercialized part of what people know about Greek warfare. But at the same time, then, literally in the same sentence, you're showing the half-built Temple of Athena Nike on the Acropolis, which has the only frieze motif of the Battle of Marathon, and it wouldn't have been built in 431 BC. It would have been under construction under the Periclean building project, and it wasn't finished. So you managed to put in a half-built temple that no one's going to look at, but you didn't put in a shield or a phalanx formation that people see in 300. And it's like, this was the same team making this. It's like, well, talk about not prioritizing. I don't disagree with them. I'm so glad they put in the Temple of Athena Nike, but I'm looking at it from a consumerist point of view, where it's like, why didn't you have that in it? And I know it was the first thing that people were pissed off about in the reviews of AC Odyssey afterwards. They were like, no phalanx, and they never added it in. And I was like, that was probably a bad call.
Yeah. I would see why you would have. I mean, those are probably two different teams. Like, there's probably like the environmental art team versus the gameplay team.
True.
And the gameplay team were probably cutting corners, I would say, in that sense, or they weren't as informed as the environmental artists were.
Yeah. None of them had watched 300. No, I'm joking.
Either that, or they were like, "Oh, this is going to be too much to code in. Let's just ignore it."
It's probably that one. It's probably people will get over it, you know.
Yeah. But we're not going to spend like 2 years trying to code in the phalanx. Like, we don't have the funding for that.
Again, we're back to money.
We're back to funding. And I think that might be a good time to end the podcast. I'm sure we could talk about stuff like this for hours, and I'm sure I have a
feeling we could, and I would very happily do it again. It's been a pleasure,
and I'm sure we'll try and patch in the missing pieces the next time I have you on. But with that, I think it's time to pack up camp and head back to either our labs or our fantasy worlds, or both. But first, why don't you let our fellow explorers know where they can find you and your work on the internet, General Ste?
I will indeed. So if you're on Twitter, it's at Ste_general. So that's at Ste_general. If you're on Twitch, it is twitch.tv/General Ste. All lowercase. And I'm about to get a new logo, but if you do it in the next couple of days or possibly the next week or so, you'll see a blue logo with a little kind of ram's head and a game controller on it, and that's General Ste, blue background. And then if you do end up following on either Twitter or Twitch, you will see a link to our Discord channel, which is the Legion on Discord. That's where that community that I was talking about earlier resides and posts tattoo pictures and quirky memes and dad jokes and helps people out with games and everything. So yeah, probably the Twitch is the best place to see me live. So twitch.tv/General Ste. It's me.
Right. Thank you, General Ste, for joining, and thank you to the listener for sparing your time. I hope you had fun learning with us today. Otherwise, stay safe, keep well, stay tuned, and cheers.
Thank you very much, Geek. Thank you for having me. See you guys.